Did you know that some of the brightest stars in Hollywood didn't fade away? They simply disappeared. One moment they were everywhere, on billboards, in headlines, on every movie screen. And then, nothing. No farewell interviews, no final bows, just silence. A vanishing act more surreal than fiction. These were legends in their prime, walking away from the fame most only dream of. No scandals, no public collapse, just a quiet exit into mystery. Today, we are going to talk about old Hollywood legends who left Hollywood behind and never looked back. Greta Garbo. She stormed Hollywood with Anna Christie in 1930 and earned 6 Oscar nominations. By 1941, her last film, Two-Faced Woman, had flopped, and she announced her retirement at age 36. According to Garbo biographer Barry Paris, she declared, "I want to be alone," after a tense test screening, words that became legend. Her farewell press conference lasted a mere 7 minutes, during which she refused to answer most questions. After leaving MGM, Garbo returned to New York City, took up painting and classical music, and rarely left her Fifth Avenue apartment. She never gave interviews or attended premieres. Neighbors recalled a solitary figure walking Central Park at dawn, clutching a small leather satchel. Film historian Robert Dance noted that Garbo's disappearance from public life was more complete than any of her on-screen disappearances. Emotions ran deep among those left behind. Director Clarence Brown lamented that her silence spoke louder than any performance. To this day, her retreat remains Hollywood's greatest vanishing act, a testament to a star who controlled her destiny by simply refusing to play the game. Diane Varscy. An electric presence on screen, Diane Varscy captured hearts at age 20 in Peyton Place. Nominated for an Academy Award, she became the face of 1950s youth rebellion. Yet by 1958, she walked off set, checked into a psychiatric clinic, and later joined a commune in Oregon, never to return to Hollywood. Born in San Mateo in 1938, Varscy won her breakout role after dropping out of college. Critics hailed her raw vulnerability. But tension with studio executives grew. She chafed under contract demands and resented being typecast. In her own words, quoted in author Michael Gregg Michaud's biography, she found the whole machinery dehumanizing. Her sudden departure stunned fans. Trade papers reported her mysterious breakdown, but details remained scarce. Varscy spent the 1960s studying Eastern philosophy, living off small acting royalties and painting. She resurfaced briefly in 1964 for a single television episode, then vanished again into private life. Friends remembered a woman torn between artistic integrity and studio control. Actor Lee Marvin said he never saw anyone so committed to truth in performance, yet so frightened by Hollywood's glare. Varscy's life after stardom was quiet and deliberate, a creative spirit who chose obscurity over fame. Dolores Hart. By 1957, Dolores Hart had already starred opposite Elvis Presley in Loving You and King Creole. Born in Chicago in 1938, she signed with Paramount at 18 and was quickly labeled Hollywood's next big thing. Then, at age 23, she stunned Tinseltown by trading her film contract for the habit of a Benedictine nun. After filming Where the Boys Are in 1960, Hart traveled to Rome for a spiritual retreat. There she met Father Benedict and felt called to monastic life. In her memoir, Ear of the Heart, she described that moment. "I knew then that fame had to end." She entered the Abbey of Regina Laudis in Connecticut, taking vows and adopting the name Sister Dolores. Colleagues recalled her as both vivacious and contemplative. Director Vincente Minnelli remarked that Hart possessed an inner light that outshone any camera flash. Her departure left studio executives scrambling for replacements. Trade magazines speculated endlessly, but Hart refused interviews. Today she remains at the Abbey, crafting icons and teaching choir. Her journey from red carpet to cloistered chapel speaks to a soul seeking deeper purpose. In the hush of morning prayer, the echoes of her Hollywood past linger like distant film reels, beautiful, haunting, and forever unfinished. Deanna Durban. The darling of Universal's golden era, Deanna Durban was earning $500,000 a year by age 17. She was discovered singing on a radio audition and signed in 1936. Her voice and effervescent screen persona saved the studio from bankruptcy. Yet in 1949, at age 28, Durban walked away from her final film, For the Love of Mary, and moved to France. Durban's early films, such as Three Smart Girls, set box office records. According to film historian David Shipman, she embodied hope during wartime. But the constant travel and publicity tours wore her down. Letters in the University of Manitoba archives reveal her longing for a private life. She married French actor Charles David in 1950 and settled in Ville d'Avray, refusing all offers to return to Hollywood. Friends said she became an avid gardener and host of family gatherings in her villa. Paparazzi attempts to capture her ended with polite refusals at her garden gate. Biographer Peter Mann described her as a star who sang herself into the shadows. Durban died in 2013 at age 92, still shielded from the public eye. Her departure remains one of cinema's great quiet exits. No scandals, no headlines, just a final curtain gently falling on a voice once heard around the world. George Maharris. In 1960, George Maharris broke out as the charismatic Buzz Murdoch on Route 66. He embodied restless youth exploring America's backroads. By 1962, he was earning Emmy buzz. Then illness and contract disputes led to his abrupt exit in 1963. He never regained his former fame. Maharris suffered a serious bout of hepatitis on location in Arizona. Studio doctors mandated rest, but tensions over salary and creative control escalated. According to TV Guide archives, Maharris declared he would rather face an empty screen than a broken body. He left the series mid-season, delivering a single farewell episode. After Hollywood, he moved to New York City and focused on stage work and painting. Rare gallery showings in the 1970s featured his landscapes, but most remained unsold. Colleagues remembered him as a free spirit who loved jazz clubs and midnight drives. Actress Martin Milner, his co-star, said he chose authenticity over artifice. In later decades, Maharris lived quietly in Connecticut, teaching acting classes and writing poetry. He granted one final television interview in 2003, reflecting that fame was a bright fire that almost burned me. His legacy endures in those few seasons of Route 66, Adventures Frozen in Time, a star who stepped off the map before the credits rolled. Mary Miles Mter. A promising silent screen ingenue whose career ended in scandal, Mary Miles Mter captivated audiences with delicate features and expressive eyes. At the height of her fame in the mid-1910s, she starred in films like The Foundling and The Heart of Nora Flynn, earning fan mail by the thousands. But in 1922, the murder of director William Desmond Taylor thrust her into the darkest tabloid frenzy Hollywood had yet seen. Rumors swirled that Mter and Taylor had been secretly engaged, and scandal sheets printed salacious claims without evidence. Studios dropped her contract within weeks. Biographer Eve Golden notes that Minter's final screen test was never developed, leaving celluloid ghosts of performances that might have been. Attempts to revive her career met with whispered reminders of that terrible affair, effectively blacklisting her from silent-era stardom. By the late 1920s, she had vanished from public life, retreating to a small estate in Pennsylvania. Neighbors recall a solitary figure tending rose gardens and writing poetry in fading journals. Film historian Anthony Slide observed that her disappearance was both abrupt and complete. No farewell press conference, no final film credit, just a silent fade-out. Friends who visited found a woman haunted by memories of applause and betrayal. In a rare letter quoted by Golden, she wrote, "The lights that once warmed me now burn me still." Decades later, scholars piecing together her story regard Mter as a cautionary emblem of how easily fame can fracture into oblivion. John Drew Barrymore. A descendant of acting royalty whose name once lit marquees, John Drew Barrymore carried both promise and burden from the moment he stepped onto a Hollywood soundstage. He first drew attention with a supporting turn in a high-profile television adaptation of Hamlet in 1952, and soon signed a contract with a major studio. Early reviews praised his natural charisma and lineage, and gossip columns touted him as the heir to a dynasty that included his grandfather Maurice and his uncle Lionel. Behind the scenes, however, Barrymore's life unraveled. By 1954, he had been married and divorced twice, fathering 4 children, including a toddler daughter whose future would eclipse his own. Studio memos from 1955 describe missed calls and unfulfilled obligations. One executive wrote that Barrymore arrived intoxicated, then disappeared before the final shot. His final film credit appeared that same year, and the following month, the studio quietly bought out his contract. In the years that followed, he retreated to rural Virginia. Local residents remember a lean figure in overalls driving an old Ford pickup to a single diner on Main Street. He spoke little of his past and declined invitations to community events. A waitress who served him coffee recalls his hollow gaze, as though he carried ghosts of an unfinished career. Film critic Leonard Maltin later wrote that Barrymore's disappearance was not a scandal or a statement. It was an erasure of everything he had been. Letters uncovered by biographer John Kobler reveal his private anguish. In one, he confessed, "The world expects a Barrymore smile, but I have none left." That admission cuts through any myth of privilege or power. His final years passed in quiet obscurity, a somber coda to a life defined by both a storied name and an absence that spoke volumes. Kay Aldridge. A model-turned-serial queen whose daring stunts thrilled matinee audiences, Kay Aldridge embodied wartime adventure before choosing a life far from Hollywood's glare. She first captured attention in 1941 as the jungle heroine Nyoka in a cliffhanger serial that played in over 500 theaters nationwide. Critics hailed her as the ideal combination of beauty and bravery, and studios rushed to cast her in further action roles. By 1945, at the height of her screen popularity, Aldridge surprised industry insiders by announcing her retirement. She had just completed her 30th film chapter and was under contract for 2 more. Trade publications speculated on salary disputes or on-set conflicts. Yet, close friends say her decision sprang from a single desire: to build a family rather than a filmography. Within weeks, she married a New York industrialist and relocated to a sprawling estate on the East Coast. Life on the ranch proved a world apart from Hollywood backlots. Aldridge traded her signature leather jumpsuit for casual cardigans as she hosted fundraisers for local charities and taught weekend painting workshops in her sunlit studio. Photographers staking out her property found locked gates and polite refusals. Those who knew her recall long afternoons spent tending rose gardens and reading detective novels on a porch swing. In a letter published after her death, Aldridge reflected, "I discovered that applause cannot warm the heart like a family's laughter." That line captures a rare serenity in Hollywood lore, a star who stepped off the screen not in disgrace, but in quiet fulfillment. Her story remains a gentle reminder that some lights burn brightest when shared with loved ones, rather than broadcast to millions. Barbara Loen. An actress turned auteur, Barbara Loen made her directorial debut with Wanda in 1970, a gritty portrayal of a woman adrift in post-industrial America. The film's raw authenticity earned critical acclaim, yet Loen vanished from the industry soon after, leaving a single masterpiece as her legacy. Producers had championed her vision, but Loden's perfectionism and refusal to compromise led to funding challenges for subsequent projects. According to interviews with co-producer Seymour Nebenzahl, she could not stomach the politics of Hollywood. After Wanda's festival circuit, she returned to the East Coast and focused on writing and private art projects. Friends describe her later years as devoted to sketching and mentoring young actors in small workshops. A surviving journal entry reads, "Words on paper feel safer than words on set." Film scholar Amy Taubin argues that Loden's disappearance underscores a painful truth. Pioneering women often paid a steep price for creative control. Though Wanda remains a touchstone in feminist cinema studies, Loen herself receded from view, leaving audiences to grapple with a singular vision rather than a prolific filmography. Her story speaks to an artist who chose integrity over industry and whose absence still echoes through cinema history. Philip Ahn. Philip Ahn's dignified presence in films like The Purple Heart and Dragon Seed helped shape Hollywood's wartime narratives. Yet his true legacy unfolded far from the silver screen. By the early 1950s, roles for Asian American actors had dwindled, and Ahn quietly asked studios to release him from his contract. Studio correspondence from 1954 records his request to serve my people beyond the camera, a decision that surprised colleagues but reflected a deeper calling. Within a year, he opened Café Ahn on Vermont Avenue, a modest restaurant serving kalbi and bibimbap that soon became a cultural gathering spot for Los Angeles's Korean community. Patrons remember An greeting guests with a warm bow, speaking little of his Hollywood past, yet listening intently to each story shared at his tables. He often said that every meal carried a memory of home, and in those moments, he found a new kind of spotlight. After closing his acting school, An devoted himself to civic work. He helped raise more than $200,000 to establish the Korean Cultural Center, mentoring young performers who had never seen themselves reflected on screen. In Los Angeles Times interviews, he described film as a chapter, not the whole story, emphasizing that identity and community transcended celluloid fame. Historian Gina Marchetti notes that An's departure exemplifies a quiet resistance to Hollywood's typecasting and limitations. His later years were marked by lectures on Asian American history and careful preservation of early film prints. When he died in 1978, obituaries praised both his cinematic achievements and his tireless community leadership. Philip An vanished from screens, but left behind institutions and memories that continue to shine, proof that some stars find their brightest purpose beyond the footlights. Ruth Taylor, a silent-era screen siren whose laughter once echoed through gilded theaters, Ruth Taylor slipped quietly into domestic obscurity after one final curtain call. Celebrated for her turn in Our Dancing Daughters in 1928, she captivated audiences with a vivacious spirit that defined flapper glamour. Yet, at the height of her fame, she chose to step off the stage, marrying and devoting herself to family life rather than chase further roles. Trade journals noted her sudden contract non-renewal in 1930, but no scandal accompanied her departure. Colleagues recalled Taylor as gentle yet determined. She refused all comeback offers, telling friends she preferred the warmth of home over the glare of spotlights. Decades later, her daughter, author Joseph Heller's mother, remembered a mother whose film reels gathered dust while she baked bread and tended roses in a sunlit kitchen. Film historians point out that Taylor's vanishing act created a void in Hollywood's memory. Few photographs exist beyond her starlet's portraits and lobby cards. Archivist Kevin Brownlow observed that her absence feels deliberate, as if she wanted her on-screen self to belong solely to that era. An unpublished letter discovered in a family album reveals Taylor's own reflection. "I owe my happiest days to those early years, but my truest joy lies here." That sentiment lingers like a faded title card, an echo of a life once captured on film, now lived in quiet rooms and remembered only by those who loved her most. Carla Leml. A niece of Universal Pictures founder, Carla Leml graced early horror classics before retreating into spiritual solitude and scholarly pursuits. Known for her youthful cameo in The Phantom of the Opera and a memorable role in The Man Who Laughs, she seemed destined for stardom. Yet by the mid-1930s, she had vanished from studio rosters, drawn instead to the promise of a life beyond celluloid. Leml later described Hollywood as a dazzling illusion I could never fully inhabit. She spent years cataloging Universal's archives, preserving film history rather than starring in it. In interviews, she spoke softly of feeling like an outsider under bright lights, finding comfort among dusty reels and lantern slides. Her disappearance from the screen did not mean disappearance from cinema entirely. As a consultant at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, she guided tours for decades, sharing anecdotes with hushed reverence. Visitors recall a graceful figure pointing out graves of stars long gone, her voice tinged with both pride and sorrow. Scholar Tom Weaver notes that Leml's choice to become custodian of memories rather than a memory herself makes her story uniquely poignant. In a private journal she penned, "I lived a dream few ever see, yet I choose to guard it rather than relive it." That decision transformed her from performer to protector, ensuring that horror's earliest legends would never truly vanish. Anne Sheridan. A celebrated oomph girl of the 1940s, Anne Sheridan shone in films such as Angels with Dirty Faces and Nora Prentice before quietly stepping away from the limelight. Studios had promoted her as a tough yet vulnerable heroine, and audiences adored her wit and presence. Yet after more than a dozen major pictures, she opted for privacy over publicity, retiring from acting in the early 1950s. Sheridan's final credited role came in a modest noir thriller in 1952. Shortly thereafter, she purchased a secluded ranch in California's high desert, trading studio backlots for wide-open skies. Friends recall sending scripts and never receiving replies. In her memoir, she hinted at exhaustion. I wanted peace more than applause. The once ubiquitous face of glamour magazines became a quiet figure at charity events, never speaking of her Hollywood past. Photographers staking out her ranch left with empty frames. Biographer Michelangelo Capua suggests her retreat was an act of self-preservation, a way to escape typecasting and endless press tours. Family letters describe Sheridan planting wildflowers and reading detective novels on her porch, a life measured in gentle routines rather than box office tallies. Her story endures as a testament to an actress who walked away on her own terms, leaving only celluloid ghosts and the memory of a star who refused to burn too brightly. Shirley Temple. A phenomenon who enchanted Depression-era America, Shirley Temple departed Hollywood as a teenager and re-emerged decades later in diplomacy rather than film. By her final screen appearance, she had already carried studios through lean years with unparalleled box office clout. Yet at age 20, she announced her retirement, stunning an industry built on her smile. Temple later recalled that the demands of constant publicity and performance tours felt like living inside a snow globe. After For the Love of Mary in 1948, she declined further roles, choosing college and eventual service as a U.S. ambassador. Her exit carried no scandal, only a deliberate turning of the page. Press agents tried to coax her back, but Temple responded with polite refusals and focus on public service. Colleagues remembered a young woman whose seriousness belied her childhood fame. Historian Robert Mattson observed that her transformation from child star to diplomat made her Hollywood's most graceful vanishing act. In her memoir, she wrote, "I had given all I could to that life." That simple truth underscores a journey from silver screen prodigy to stateswoman, proving that some stars shine brightest when they step out of the spotlight. Peg Antwistle. A single film credit belies the haunting legend of Peg Antwistle, whose tragic end atop the Hollywood sign became the darkest symbol of vanished dreams. After success on Broadway, she arrived in Hollywood in 1932, landing a minor role in One Way Ticket. Yet within months, she disappeared from both screen and stage, ending her life in an act of despair that stunned the nation. Newspaper accounts at the time described her final note, "I'm afraid I am a coward." That heartbreaking confession revealed the chasm between on-screen promise and private torment. Studios largely ignored her disappearance, chalking it up to personal tragedy rather than industry failure. Biographer Tate Penland suggests Antwistle's vanishing act was both literal and symbolic, a stark reminder of Hollywood's unforgiving glare. Local lore claims her spirit still wanders beneath the sign, a silent witness to the cost of fame. Her story endures in whispered retellings and the fading silhouette of the H in Hollywood. In the absence of roles and applause, Antwistle's legacy stands as a solemn testament to a star whose brightest moment was a final, tragic farewell. Marilyn Miller. Illuminating both Broadway marquees and early sound pictures, Marilyn Miller became a symbol of roaring 20s glamour before stepping away from Hollywood's glare. Her performance in the 1929 film Sally made her one of the first stage stars to conquer talkies, yet by 1930, she turned down further screen offers to return to live theater. Studio records from First National Pictures show her rejecting a lucrative multi-picture contract, citing exhaustion and a yearning for creative control. After her final appearance, Miller retreated to a quiet estate in New Jersey, where she hosted intimate gatherings for fellow performers. Letters in the New York Public Library archives reveal her fascination with interior design and philanthropy, rather than scripts and spotlights. Friends described evenings spent listening to her reminisce about opening nights, rather than scouting for new roles. Despite occasional press inquiries, Miller never gave interviews. Her name faded from film magazines even as her Broadway legend endured. A surviving diary entry reads, "I have traded applause for authenticity," suggesting a deliberate farewell rather than an accidental slip into obscurity. Decades later, theater historians unearth fragments of her legacy in faded playbills and rare newsreel clips. Yet Miller herself remains elusive, her final act not on stage or screen, but in choosing a life lived beyond the footlights. James Murray. After delivering a performance that redefined cinematic realism, James Murray vanished into the shadows of his own legend. Praised for his raw portrayal in the crowd, he was hailed as the everyman of the silver screen, yet personal demons quickly eclipsed his promise. Studio correspondence from 1930s archives describes his growing dependence on alcohol and missed call times, prompting executives to drop him from major projects. In the months following his last credited role, Murray drifted through New York City, reportedly taking odd jobs and living in flop houses. A 1936 police report found his body near the Hudson River, sparking speculation of foul play or accidental drowning. Colleagues remembered a gentle soul whose talent was overshadowed by a fragile spirit. Biographer Joseph McBride notes that Murray's disappearance was neither dramatic nor deliberate. It was a slow fade, a man consumed by the weight of stardom he never fully embraced. In a letter to a friend, he lamented, "I cannot carry this mask any longer," a phrase that haunts those who study his brief, brilliant career. Today, film scholars regard Murray's story as a cautionary echo of Hollywood's promise, a reminder that even the brightest lights can dim without support, leaving only a name in faded studio logs and a final, unanswered question. Margaret Sullivan. Renowned for her luminous presence and piercing gaze, Margaret Sullivan commanded every scene she entered before abruptly stepping off the screen. After acclaimed roles in The Shop Around the Corner and So Red the Rose, she walked away in the mid-1940s, citing personal struggles and a desire for normalcy. Studio memos note her growing anxiety and refusal to film love scenes, marking her final contract as unfulfillable. Following her exit, Sullivan divided her time between small theater productions and quiet retreats in Vermont. Friends recall long walks where she spoke of seeking a peace film could never offer. Letters preserved by the University of Virginia reveal her fear that Hollywood would consume the heart behind the mask. Her occasional public appearance, often in oversized sunglasses, sparked flashbulb chases, but she never gave a statement. Director Ernst Lubitsch lamented that her absence left a void no star could fill. Sullivan's life ended tragically in 1960, her final years spent away from screens and spotlights. To this day, her name conjures both the golden era she helped define and the fragility that forced her retreat, a poignant reminder that even those who enchant millions can vanish into the quiet of their own making. Francis Lederer. Once celebrated for his cosmopolitan charm in 1930s Hollywood dramas, Francis Lederer turned his back on the studios just as his star was ascending. After standout performances in The Royal Family of Broadway and A Farewell to Arms, he declined a major contract renewal, choosing instead to pursue theater and civic engagement in his native Europe. Studio correspondence from 1937 shows executives bewildered by his sudden resignation. Lederer's post-Hollywood years were devoted to stage roles in Prague and later to political activism during World War II. He organized refugee aid and lectured on democratic ideals, a stark contrast to the escapist fare of Tinseltown. Film historians note that his disappearance from American screens was both ideological and personal, a conscious refusal to be complicit in an industry he deemed superficial. In interviews conducted late in life, Lederer reflected that, "Acting taught me empathy, but life demanded action." His legacy lives on in theater archives and wartime memoirs rather than film reels. When he died in 2000, obituaries honored both his cinematic beginnings and his humanitarian achievements. Lederer's journey illustrates that some actors choose a different kind of spotlight, one aimed at societal change rather than box office glory, leaving Hollywood behind without a backward glance. Hedi Lamar. Beyond her striking beauty and on-screen magnetism, Hedi Lamar was a brilliant inventor whose off-screen pursuits eclipsed her film career. After dazzling audiences in Algiers and Samson and Delilah, she grew frustrated with studio constraints and typecasting. By 1951, she had effectively retired from acting, shifting her genius to frequency-hopping technology that would later influence modern communications. Patent records from 1942 document Lamar's collaboration with composer George Antheil on a secret communication system designed to guide torpedoes. Yet her invention remained classified and uncredited for decades. Meanwhile, she faded from Hollywood's social circles, granting only sporadic interviews. Friends recalled her tinkering in a basement workshop rather than attending premieres. In a rare 1966 magazine feature, she lamented that, "The world knows me as an actress, not an inventor." Later years found her living in Florida, collecting awards for her technical contributions, but shunning the limelight. Biographer Ruth Barton writes that Lamar's disappearance from film was not an escape, but an evolution, a transformation from starlet to unsung pioneer. Today, her name resonates in both cinematic history and wireless technology. Lamar's vanishing act was neither tragic nor silent. It was a reinvention, proof that some legacies extend far beyond the footlights.